I think just speed of iteration is this thing that's just been reinforced. When you're burning money as an early stage startup, you've raised a bunch of venture and like every month is cash flow negative. You don't have time. Time is like your worst enemy. The pressure of time is heavy and intense. The faster you can get to the right answer, the better off you are. And a lot of people spend too much time overanalyzing, scenario modeling, product testing, and not putting it in the hands of users. And if you don't put it in the hands of users, you have no idea how they're going to react. I think we're building for the next 10, maybe 15 years here. And so I try to take a little bit of a longer term view. We've picked investors that take that longer term view because, I think it takes at least 10 years to build a real company. We were like 6 weeks away from cash out.
Oh my God.
People try to define what an entrepreneur is and like what it means to be a founder and all that kind of stuff, right? I think that the true test is if you feel the weight of payroll on your shoulders and like the livelihood of, if you feel the weight of the livelihood of like whatever number of people on your shoulders, then, I think you can like give yourself that title.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Dan, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, Pablo, thanks for having me on.
I'm excited for it, man, because like your journey was kind of just a crazy classic roller coaster in a way, but like just very, very high highs and then just like ridiculously. I mean, if you went any lower, I think your business was done. Like you really came close. But not only did you like rescue it, like you're now all the way back, just raised a $50 million round at the same valuation you had like pre-COVID. We'll get into all that. I mean, let's start at the beginning, like kind of how's Clutch, born?
Steve Zeibel was the founder, started the company back in 2017, really around this problem of used car transactions. To us, it feels crazy that even in 2017, 2018, the only 2 options to buy a car were either go to a dealership and spend 5-6 hours haggling with a salesperson, or you meet some stranger at a Tim Hortons or a Walmart parking lot. In the US, there's a couple of large retailers that have been around for decades. In Canada, there's massive white space where there's no retail brand for used cars in this country. You go to Vancouver, you're getting, you got to go to some random dealership. You go to Toronto, some other, set of dealerships. And so, we felt like there was a need to provide a consistent experience under a trusted brand where consumers can go and know exactly what they're getting in terms of quality when it comes to buying a used vehicle. One of the largest purchases that most people will make, and to us, it seemed insane that those were the only real ways to buy a car.
That's the high level idea, and obviously you have like I would like. Did you look at like the models in the US? Like, did you look at Carvana and some of those, or were you kind of like building from first principles?
Yeah, we certainly looked at them to a certain extent. I mean, it was still early. There were a number of companies across the globe, whether it was in Australia or the UK, Indonesia, Mexico. Everyone had a version of this. It kind of felt like, late, early 2010s when it came to ride sharing, where there was Uber, there was Sidecar, there was Lyft, and there was the folks in the UK, and it felt like it was still really early. And I think we modeled it off of to a certain extent the CarMax brand and the CarMax experience, but again, with the Carvana that was starting to emerge at the time.
And what's like the first? I mean, with a model like this, like in a sense, there's parts of it because you're going after some traditional like buying and selling cars that are kind of like easy, like there is demand for cars. That people want to buy used cars. If the pricing's right and so on and so forth, like there will be people on the other side of that transaction. But then there's the hard parts, which is like maybe everything else, like especially just buying cars, getting a debt facility, all those pieces. Like what's kind of the first move to get something like this off the ground?
It's this funny chicken and egg problem because it's effectively a marketplace. It's a two-sided marketplace, supply and demand. Supply is obviously inventory of vehicles. Demand is people wanting to buy cars. And you got that cold start problem where in order to attract people to the website and to the marketplace, you need to have selection. but buying selection or accumulating selection is incredibly hard in this industry, right? Like every SKU we have is anywhere between $20,000 to $35,000. And so building supply is capital intensive. Early days, people were like, why don't you take it on consignment? Why don't you, just do a marketplace, no asset light? I think that's where I think a lot of these companies went wrong, because you can't control the full experience if you don't own the asset. And so, early days when I was pitching to investors, a lot of them were like, hey, look, like you can't own the asset. It's too capital intensive. But for us, that was such a fundamental piece of the model. And buying the cars outright, one, gives the consumer immediate liquidity for something that traditionally takes, hours, days, whatever, weeks to sell, visiting a bunch of dealerships, inviting, strangers to their home to kick the tires. It's just a terrible, terrible experience, super broken. And so, for us, owning that asset allows us to have eyes on the asset. We have clutch employees inspecting those cars, reconditioning those vehicles to our standard, and so that we could put our seal of approval when it goes out the door, so that we know that we can stand by that product quality. Otherwise, trying to do this on consignment, relying on the network of dealerships, it didn't feel like we were really reinventing anything. And so it was such a crucial piece of it. And so, kind of going back to your original question about how you start, you need a lot of capital. In early days, we didn't have much. And so we started off small. I had a personal guarantee on a small loan. Steve, founder, had a personal guarantee on the loan. We were fully secured assets. We were paying like 15-16% interest rate. If I ever come back as a, lender to fixed assets and, back startups that are buying cars, I'd probably do that. It was like basically risk-free return. 15% risk-free return. But that's what we had to do early days to be able to get this off the ground. And even then, $3 million really only buys you, 90 to 100 cars, depending on the car. And so, even at that level, you're not really building a real marketplace. And so I think, we were lucky in that we started in a time that was, that was, I guess, capital abundant and capital.
This is what, 2018, by the time you're actually buying these cars?
Well, I think we really started hitting the inflection point. It was like just post-pandemic, 2021, 2022, when I joined Steve in late 2019. And at that point, we were only in Halifax. The regulator Ontario couldn't really get around our business model, and so had to we couldn't launch in Ontario because we didn't have a license to sell cars. It's a regulated industry, and so we launched. Steve literally flew to Halifax, had never been there before. It was the province, there's the closest province that had the least amount of regulations that allowed us to sell used cars online. So he started there, kind of found that product.
When you came in, like how many used cars was he selling, a month, let's say, more or less, round numbers?
20, 30, which was decent. It showed that we had something. And it was clear that people that tried the service really loved it. And, the name of the podcast is Product Market Fit. Like I came in knowing we had product market fit. The experience was phenomenal. Customers were raving about it. And so the question was really, how do you scale this? How do you prove that the business model works and the unit economics of this business works? And so that at that time, 2020, early 2020, this was like, I joined in late 2019. We were only in Halifax. We were trying to launch Toronto. We finally got a license to launch in Toronto. And then within 30 days of launching in Toronto was a global pandemic. People thought they were never going to go anywhere again. And so lockdown, car sales went to zero the next month. We were scrambling, trying to figure out what we were going to do with the business, and furloughed some employees, kind of really turned off anything that wasn't helping sell cars.
And you're bleeding money, right? Like when these cars are sitting on the lot, like you financing these?
We're getting interest on we call it floor plan, but that's the debt facility that you use on the vehicles. But then, within 3 months, right, like everyone now didn't want to go on public transit. We're scared to take Ubers. And then cars were like the hottest thing. And so that's when, we had just raised a seed round, which again, that bought us some time. And then luckily, things started rebounding really quickly. I think we doubled revenue that year. And then we raised a Series A in late 2020. Investors got super excited about the category. And then we quadrupled revenue the next year. And so it was like this it was crazy frenzy. And at that point, every company globally was raising capital, really trying to go big. In Canada, there was us and another competitor. We then raised our Series B in 2021. 2022, we raised our Series B, and that was like a $75 million round. And then, our competitor raised 100, and we were,
Who was the competitor?
Called Canada Drives. And so they'd raise a bunch of money. We'd raise a bunch of money. They were launching markets. We were launching markets. It felt, I spent some years at Uber. It felt very much like those Uber days where, if you didn't launch a market first, you basically were never going to win market share. And so we felt very compelled to just, go big, win market share. It was effectively a land grab. These marketplaces are effectively winner take all, if not most. And so there was this like mad rush to launch markets. We launched Calgary, we launched Vancouver, we launched Saskatoon. And at that point, we hadn't proven out the unit economics at that point. And so continuing to burn capital. After we raised that round, I think we hired 250 people within 6 months.
Wow. That's after which round? That's after the Series B?
Yeah, so late 2022. And people were aggressive. They wanted growth. And so we were like, let's go.
And this was collectively. Like, I assume the investors were telling you, like, how do you spend more money? How do we grow faster? These sort of things.
Yeah. So we went from 10 million in revenue in 19 to 200 million in revenue in 2020. So, scale, again, this was at, we'd raised a lot of money, and so that we were able to do that. But that very quickly, late 2022, early 2023, you started seeing, the signs that things started cracking, capital was less abundant. And
how big were you then? So you're at 200 million by end of 2020?
2022.
In fact, we 20x the revenue in 3 years. And then all of a sudden, it was very quick. First, like the back half of 2022, people started, there was no more cap. Basically people were like, there's no more money. Like there's that summer, every VC, I think was either in Aspen or in like Italy. I was trying to refill again at that point. Like no one was taking my call, and and I have this rule that if you don't raise capital by Halloween, it's pretty hard to close it by the end of the year. And so we had this Halloween deadline that if we didn't raise capital by Halloween, we'd effectively have to make some pretty big changes to the business. And luckily we signed a term sheet in, it was 4 days after Halloween, November 4th. So we just just got in there. We had the term sheet in hand pre-Halloween, but signed it on the 4th. And then we were working towards, it was a $95 million Series C round. We were working to try to close it. And then on January 5th, the lead investor called us and said, look, we're not feeling this anymore. So within 12 days, we did another 150 person layoff, which was painful.
You were at what? Like just employee count? Like what was peak? And then where were you before this and then after it?
Peak was 350, and then 87 was our kind of low point.
So, but this you brought down from 350 to 200? That was after this moment?
80. Well, we did 350 in the summer. We went from 350 to 250, and then we effectively went down to 87. The first one, was stung, but it was, I think it was something that a lot of companies were doing at that point. Though the second was a survival move. And so we basically reduced the burn to virtually nothing.
How do you do that? Like, we'll talk about the feeling side of it, but maybe just like tactically, like how do you communicate that internally so that the people there don't just assume like there's two pieces of it. I'm just thinking out loud here. Part of it is like, hey, like now that we do this, like we're not gonna, go out of business in 2 months or whatever. So like you don't need to leave. But then the other side of it is like, okay, so maybe you're not gonna go out of business, but I was here because like Clutch was supposed to be unicorn, like Clutch was this rocket ship, and now like we're going down. Like why would I be here? Like how do you address that kind of concern?
Well, I think the fortunate thing that I think we could always rely on was the fact that we weren't alone. Like it was a time where every
that's true.
Your like growth scale startup was going through the exact same thing as we were. And so sure, maybe that didn't exist at Clutch, at least at that point, but it didn't exist anywhere else really at that time either. You saw valuation, even in the public markets, most marketplace / e-commerce business were down 90 to 95%, right? You saw, companies even like, Zoom and, the pandemic darlings, Peloton, they were down 90. Well, Zoom not, but Peloton was down 90, 7% at one point, right? So I think that was one, that the fact that it makes it a lot easier when you're not alone. But two, and more tactically, it's really about baby steps and achievable milestones. And again, kind of going back to the name of this podcast, like product market fit, we really had great product market fit. Like we knew that people really loved the experience and that this was needed in the Canadian market. And so I think a lot of us, as maybe cheesy as it sounds, like we were kind of like mission driven in the sense that we felt like we owed it to the Canadian population to have a service that made it easier for people to buy something that's pretty complicated. So we kind of looked at it at like smaller increments. And so in January, when we did that pretty major layoff, it was really about how do we get to the next 3 months and what do we need to show over the next 3 months to prove to ourselves, not even to investors, just to ourselves, that this business model is going to work, right? And maybe it won't be fully profitable by then, but like what are the signs of life that will show that this is profitable in the long term and can continue to scale? And then at 6 months, what's that kind of like milestone once you hit it? And so, I think the smaller wins over time, really are encouraging for the team, and it certainly was for me. We didn't from that period. We lost very, very few people from our 30-person leadership team of people managers and folks that are kind of in leadership positions. We didn't have anyone leave for 2 years.
Wow. What do you attribute that to?
I think people really got excited about what we were delivering. We internally knew that we had something that worked, but the outside capital markets weren't really valuing it at what we thought it was valued. And even today, of that core group of like kind of 30-ish people leaders, we only had one person leave over the last, since then. And so I think we've got now at this point like a really seasoned team that's been, battle tested, for lack of a better term, that's seen some stuff. And when you go through some hard things together as a team, there's a lot of confidence that gets built.
Did you ever worry, because I totally agree. I mean, going through the battles, if you get to the other side, there's huge value in having gone through serious battles together. But did you ever worry, you or your team, in those days, that one of the things I'm just thinking back to those days that was being thought about was like, yeah, there's product market fit. Clearly people buy cars, all these sort of things. But like maybe this idea that this would be valued at 10x sales or 5x sales or whatever, that's just gone. Like it's just never going to go back to that. We're always going to be like a 0.5x sales business. And then what does that mean for the potential of this business? Like, was that a discussion internally? Was that a concern?
Yeah, I think I'm a big believer in mean reversion, right? So the car build business has been around forever at fundamentally a train on EBITDA, right? At some point. And so again, I wasn't too worried about what the market was going to value us, because candidly, like we weren't thinking about an exit. And at that point, we earlier days we weren't. There were times where like, does this make sense? And we can kind of go into this, but like, longer term, it doesn't matter. Like, there's only so much as a founder or CEO. There's very little that you can control in terms of how markets value you. At the end of the day, though, like I think mean reversion is a real thing. And if you build a big, successful, profitable business, there's going to be value in that, right?
So that was kind of what grounded you kind of through that, because like that's the problem. Like the upside of, you mentioned this, like, well, it wasn't just us, which is comforting. The flip side of it is, okay, maybe, everybody was wrong back then and now everyone's right. Like the market is now like, this is the true price of these things. And that would suck, right? Like it just in terms of the equity value.
Yeah. And again, it really wasn't a focus area of ours. The only thing that matters is, whether you're an investor or you're a employee or financially, the only thing that matters if you're an investor or an employee is how much you own and what the value is at exit, right? The interim valuations, to a certain extent, are milestones, but they don't really. It doesn't. You could be valued at $10 billion, but if no one's willing to, have you exit at that number, then it doesn't matter, right? So, I try to take a longer. I think we're building for the next 10, maybe 15 years here. And so I try to take a little bit of a longer term view. We've picked investors that take that longer term view because, I think it takes at least 10 years to build a real company. And so I think you got to, as an entrepreneur, you kind of need to sign up for that. And if you get hiccups like we have, it extends to like a 15 to 20-year journey. But, at the end of the day, it takes a really long time, right? It takes time. And so getting too worried about the interim valuation benchmarks, I don't think really I think it's interesting, but it doesn't fundamentally matter.
How close were you, like runway wise? What did that look like? So like this round falls apart, you do these layoffs, and you have 87 people. Are you profitable, or do you still have like short runway?
We were like 6 weeks away from cash out.
Oh my God.
I think, people try to define what an entrepreneur is and like what it means to be a founder and all that kind of stuff, right? I think that the true test is, do you feel the weight of payroll on your shoulders and like the livelihood of, if you feel the weight of the livelihood of like whatever number of people on your shoulders, then, I think you can like give yourself that title. For us, yeah, it was pretty dire straits for a bit. And luckily we had some really supportive investors. The press reported on some pretty big valuation declines as a result of the round that we had to raise in mid 2023 to get us through to kind of, but the goal of that round was to get us to profitability. And so we had investors, Kanan in particular out of New York, like Laura, who was on our board and is still on our board today, really was supportive around the company, believed in what we were building despite, the drastic downturn in public market valuations, and really bridged us to be able to survive.
Was that all part of the thing? Like you did these layoffs plus this round, that was kind of one thing, or did one kind of come after?
No, it was, we did the layoffs and then 6 months later we did the round. It was almost like, let's show some proof points between now and when we were like, when things are really going to be bad.
But you had 6 weeks. You have 6 weeks of cash outs. Like, what do you do?
Well, we had to restructure some of the debt at that point. It was a debt issue, and so without getting into too many details, but we at one point we like triggered some debt covenants, and so
I see.
It created a bunch of uncertainty, and at that point, that was like the early part of 2023. We actually had to contemplate potentially selling the business. And so we did get a pretty lowball offer that we considered for a hot second. And then there was even a point where it's like, hey, does this make sense to continue at this scale? But again, I think, there was this belief that I think we had a great product that I think we could scale across the country. It just was a bad point in time.
But what was the focus? Like, again, I'm just trying to get the narrative. Like round falls apart, you do the layoffs, 6 weeks, you restructure the debt, and then do you focus the team on growth? Do you focus them on just strict, like, let's just get to profitability, unit economics? Like, what's the key thing?
Effectively, it was like a 4-thing playbook that we used. And it's really specific to our industry, but it was one of it was just setting a standard for all our reconditioning. Some of our cars are being over reconditioned, so putting too much money into the car. A good example is windshields, right? It costs you about $800 to $900 to replace the entire windshield. It costs you like $20 to fill in a chip. And a good quality chip fill is actually quite good. And so, we made that trade-off. So there's that. There was also, we had, in our business, we also sell warranties, and half the business is almost like a fintech business where we sell warranties and insurance and financing. It wasn't really a focus when we were scaling at, hyperscale, but now that we were trying to become profitable, building gross margin was an important factor. And so we focused on that. We did a lot of work around inventory management. A lot of our cars were aging too much. And so a big focus to make sure that our cars weren't aging. And then we spent a lot of time on CAC efficiency. And so that helped us drive down costs, increase profit, gross profit. And, ultimately last year we got to profitability.
In 2024?
2024.
Okay. But halfway through, you raised that, so what did that bridge, like, so you got that bridge across, what did that look like?
That was in the summer of 2023. So it took about a year to get to profitability. It was a $20 million kind of bridge in the summer of 2023. And it did what it was designed to do and get us to that milestone.
How did you price that?
It was more of like it was such a big cram down round. It was priced really by the lead investor at a number that put money back in the company, but also was able to get, they were able to get the ownership that they wanted.
But this is it was like a 90% markdown, something like that.
Yeah. But so basically they're weighted, effectively, like, you do the math around what you think the exit value can be in the medium to long term, and then you back solve it to the amount of capital that you put in, right? And then you look at like what return you want to get, and then you got to figure out what your ownership is going to be, right? And so, given the amount of capital you're going to put in, and then the ownership that it needs to be in order to get to this return hurdle, then you basically that sets the pre-money valuation.
So at this point, you're profitable. Do you go back then into, and how many employees are you by now? Like, do you go back into ramping after this round, or what was the point? Like, what was the goal with this round?
This round, the one we just announced.
That bridge round.
Oh, that bridge round. No, so the point of that round was really just to get to profitability. We didn't hire that many people. We really just focused on variable cost hires, so hires that scale with the business. So, for example, licensed mechanics. If you sell 10 cars, you need call it one. I'm just making these numbers up. If you need two, if you're going to sell 20, you need two. So those are kind of linearly variable, but we didn't really do a lot of dev or product hiring. Our marketing team was like 3 people, and so we kept all our fixed costs very, very flat, really to get ourselves to a point where we were profitable, and that was the focus. And that way we were laser focused on getting there, but we had to grow. We had to we effectively doubled the business in order to do that. We couldn't. We had to grow and get profitable at the same time, which it's never easy, but we were able to do it.
Did you that $200 million revenue? Did it start crashing down and then you had to bring it back up, or was revenue pretty steady, but it was more just under that it was kind of messy?
Yeah, that next year, the only reason it kind of crashed is because we shut down 3 of our West Coast markets, and so we took out the cost, but the revenue went out with it. So those were unprofitable markets. So from a EBITDA perspective, they were accretive. For a revenue perspective, they were dilutive.
Are you back now more or less to where you were?
No, we're now double our peak. So we're at 400 million of revenue now.
You love this show. You don't want to miss the next episode. Why would you? So hit that follow button. Trust me, it's in your own best interest.
What's it feel like? Because, to go down that low and to come all the way back up, in revenue, doubling it, but in terms of valuation, I'm sure there were many people that would have assumed best case you sell this for scrap sort of thing. Like, it's never going to go back to what it was. $500 million, 575. Like, it's a serious valuation. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you were a small thing that it was 50 and then it was 10 and now you're trying to go back to 50. Like, you were, $500 million and then now you're whatever, tens of millions, and then now you're back to $500 million. So what's that feel like? Is it vindicating?
I mean, a little bit. I feel like there's always because we're trying to disrupt an industry, and we're not mainstream yet. It just feels like we still have so much work to do. So it's like, okay, this is great, but and that was a blip, and I think a lot of us have just put it behind us. And so it's I guess it's fun to tell the story now that we've gone through it, but it just feels like it's still day one, and we've got literally a decade. I still feel like I've got a decade of building in front of me right now. Yes, I mean, it's nice to take it in for a second, but at the same time, it would have been nice not to have gone through that, right? And just continue linearly, as opposed to having to take not only 2 steps back, maybe 74 steps back to take 78 forward, right? It feels like it feels slightly surreal. It feels like we got lucky, and so it feels like we can't squander this opportunity now that we're back to where we were maybe 2.5 years ago.
By the way, question. This is completely off the timeline, but just going back to the very early days, because it's not that common for companies will bring in professional CEOs, but oftentimes it's later on, you're past 10 million or you're past 100, you bring in a professional CEO. You came in super early. How did that happen? Why did Steve bring you in? How did you meet him? All that stuff.
Professional CEO at that time.
You were an outside CEO. I don't know what you want to call it. Or were you co-founder?
I was the guy that had run a business unit for a large company. That's so kind of and I've sat on board. I was not by any stretch of the imagination, I was not a professional CEO. I was the guy that was slightly older and had a little bit more experience than Steve, the founder, and knew a few more people. And so I don't think he was actually looking for a professional CEO at that. I mean, he was looking for a partner. I joined him pretty early. I joined him pre the seed round, so pre-seed. And he started the business when I think he was 24 years old. So, that I could not have started this when I was 24 years old. And so I think he wanted just some guidance around particularly the fundraising piece. This is a very, very capital intensive business. At this point, we've raised 190 million because you need the equity to support the debt. You need the debt to be able to support the equity. You need to be able to buy cars. You need to be able, like our working capital. I think we buy about $1 million worth of cars daily. And, at any given point, we have, almost $1 billion of offers outstanding in the business. And, on a big weekend, we'll flip 5 million of cars. And so it's a very capital intensive business. And so I think that's where that came from. And I got really lucky. We get along. We're very different people professionally. We're similar people personally, which I think really works well. And I think the important thing over the last 5 years is that, because of these shared experiences, there's been a lot of trust built. He's good at a lot of things that I'm not. I'd like to think that I'm good at things that he's not. And so that partnership really works well. And I think that's rare to find. So I got lucky there.
I think it is rare to find. I want to dig into it just a bit, just because I think, like, from a founder perspective, it's not like I've seen it a few times, but it's not that common to think about it. Most founders start off, they want to be CEO, and like they probably will die on that ship, like ride or die, something, whatever happens. But in the right cases, in the right instances with the right person, like, it can be an option. When you joined, Steve, had he raised any money, or was it just bootstrapped with his like personal?
No, he'd raised a little bit of money, like a pre-seed round. He raised a pre-seed round, and I came and I raised I went on notes, and then I raised a priced seed round.
How big was that seed round?
4 million.
And did he, like, when you started talking, he was like, and he met you, he said, "Oh, you'd be a great CEO," or at first it was just like, "Come work with me on this, we'll figure it out"? Like, what was the setup, for that conversation?
So I got a call from one of Clutch's board members back in 2019, and I was pretty happy at Uber.
You were running what part of Uber? Like, which your GM of?
Uber Eats in Canada. And so we had a great run. I mean, the Uber Eats business actually was launched out of Toronto. And so we had like pretty good global influence, which was fun because we got to sit on.
That was the first market, right? Uber Eats opened in Toronto. Okay.
Market. And it scaled like crazy. Had a great team, really great team. We signed all these partnerships. So I had a couple more years left, but I got a call from one of our board members, and he was like, "Hey, look, like, I'd met him in my VC days, and he was like, "Hey, look, like, you're delivering food. You should probably deliver cars instead. Like, let me introduce you to this company called Clutch." And I was like, I don't know if that's the same thing, but like, they were actually looking for a COO at the top. And I asked the board member, his name was Andrew. I was like, "Hey, Andrew, like, what do you want me to do?" He's like, "Well, I want you to raise some capital. I want to hire some, recruit some people, lead the business longer term." And I'm like, okay, those are like CEO jobs. And so I kind of like threw it out there, like, just as a thing. I was like, well, if you need a CEO, let me know. But, I'm pretty happy where I am. And he called me literally 2 days later. He's like, "Yeah, had a conversation with Steve. He's open to that. Let's meet." And so we sat down, and it was like a really great like we had a bunch of conversations. We probably had like a dozen conversations, really just talking about what we enjoyed doing, what we didn't enjoy doing. And that Venn diagram had a very small overlap. We felt like that could be a really good partnership because it felt like the things that he didn't want to do, like he did not want to fundraise. And I was like, I don't mind fundraising. And which was one of the big things. Like, he really liked product and engineering. He's doesn't have a technical background, but he's very technical, and I'm not as much. And so he wanted to run product and eng. I'm like, fantastic, you can do that. I did most of the go-to-market stuff, and so it ended up being a really good, complementary partnership that I think we both recognized could work. But again, I think also we were lucky in that regard.
Is that like, could you think of it like an internal external split? Like, at least in those early days, I'm sure it evolved over time.
No, I mean, not in the early days, there was less external, frankly, to do. Now I'm doing more external stuff. I would say like 80% external, 20% internal. Bubble flips that. And so I think that works well. I don't think either of us have really like any ego around what we do, right? Like we just, whatever makes sense for the business. And I think that's like kind of true for the entire management team. Everyone, I think, almost could do anyone else's job. It's just a matter of who can do it better and who's more interested in doing that thing. And I think that works really well from a team perspective, because I think everyone can kind of like leverage each other's strengths.
Was there a discussion around like decision making? Obviously, a CEO, like, the buck stops with you, you make the final calls. But I have to imagine, like, from a founder perspective, that would probably be the biggest thing you'd want to not give up, is like, to the extent that you have a vision or a way you want to do things, and whatever piece of the puzzle you want to own, you'd be probably hesitant to give that up. You know what I mean? Like, was that part of the discussions early?
Yeah, we did. I mean, yes, but not really. I mean, ultimately, today we have a really great working cadence, and so there's times we disagree with each other, but if we do, we can generally talk it out and come to the right answer. I think we've always come to the right answer together, whether it's around people, whether it's around like strategic direction, launching markets. And I think there's also just a lot of trust, implicit trust. Like I've seen what he can do, and we've seen a lot of success. And so I think we also give each other a lot of rope to just run with it and make mistakes. And I think that just works well.
But initially, I guess it was just built on like, we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. I think it's like, it's almost like, I mean, look, people use this thing, it's a little bit cliche, but it's like a marriage, right? Like you can't go into a marriage and be like, I have ultimate decision-making power in this relationship, right?
I agree, but I'm not CEO of my marriage. You got to ask my wife.
Well, no, I know, but look the other way around. I'm certainly not either. But like, if it went the other way, I don't think that one's either, right? Like, I don't think there's any relation, functional marriages where
that's
is
true.
Like, I have final say no matter what, right? Like, there's always going to be compromise. There's going to be talking it through. It's going to come to the best answer, whether it's around like what vacation take or like, what to do with your kids. Like, there's always going to be some kind of like compromise, and we've been fortunate that we've been able to like work every situation we've been able to work out and get on the same page and just support each other.
And let me ask you this, like, normally my one of my final questions is like, when did you know you find product market fit? But you said you went in and you kind of already had product market fit. When you looked at the business back then, what did you think was the biggest unknown, like the biggest risk, but the thing that you actually had to figure out?
So I guess we knew we had product market fit in the sense that people wanted a better way to buy and sell vehicles. What we didn't know is like what process people would be comfortable with. And the biggest question mark was test drives. People generally believe traditionally that you can't sell a car without a test drive. And that was a pretty fundamental piece that we hadn't figured out yet. And so what we were doing back then when I joined initially was we were basically providing vehicle, it was called car enthusiasts or car concierges, that if you wanted to test drive a car, we would bring you a car to test drive in your neighborhood.
Wow.
And you could do that up to, I think, 3 times. Incredibly inefficient. And people talk about things like, if you can't do things that you can't scale, like that was not scalable, right? Like it was, you take a car to a customer, they'd be like, I don't like this one. You take another one, and every time you have to detail it, right? And so you take it, and they're like, okay, I like this one, but because you hadn't done the paperwork, you can't. You have to bring it back, arrange for financing, and then they like it, and then you bring it back to them. But in that like turnaround time, they could cancel. It'll be like, actually, I don't want it anymore. And so you've done all of this work for basically nothing, right? We knew that the right answer was like, you have to just sell these, like, Amazon sells, books, but we just didn't know like how to do that. And I guess like for us, that's probably the secret sauce. Cause I think a lot of dealerships still feel like they can't sell a car without a test drive, but we know we can. So that was the piece that we needed to figure out. And it took some time to figure that one out.
Well, you kind of changed like a free trial to like a money back guarantee, like here's the car, buy it, but you have 7 days, if I understand correctly, to kind of test it out, which is it's much better in a sense, like it's kind of a win-win. Like, I mean, for the person who's just like in test mode, maybe you have to go to the dealerships if you really want to try out 5 or 10 cars or whatever. But if you're like actually serious and you want to buy a car, a test drive almost like oftentimes like isn't really enough. You know what I mean? Like you drive it around a little loop and you're done. Whereas this, you actually have the car, you truly test it out, and worst case scenario, you can give it back. But
Here's the kind of first principles belief around test drives is that generally the average consumer doesn't know much about cars, right? And if you get into a car and try to test drive it, what are you learning about the vehicle? You're learning about like whether the brakes work, whether the air conditioning blows cold, it doesn't smell funny, right? There's no cosmetic issues, right? There's like little rips on the seat, right? But it's like relatively clean. So like that's kind of, you look at the hood, look under the hood. It's like, okay, well, what are you looking at really, right? So that's like the average consumer, and they go to do these test drives, and it gives them peace of mind because they've done those things. But you know what? We have licensed mechanics that put every single car up on a hoist, right? And looks at each one, has an inspection list. We take pictures. We replace anything that doesn't meet our standard, whether it's tires, brakes, rotors, air filters, like full oil change, like alignment. We do everything, right? These are licensed mechanics that do this professionally. They're in a better position to be able to assure the quality of your vehicle than you as a random consumer. And so if we can get that message across and let people know that, look, like we really take pride in the quality of this vehicle and can offer you at an even better price than the dealership next door, like you'd be insane not to buy this car. And then if it doesn't fit in your garage, if your car seat doesn't work in that car for whatever reason, you should probably get a new car seat instead of a new car. But whatever it doesn't fit in your driveway, or it's like it feels too small or whatever, then you can return it, right? But those, like, you can't tell whether or not it fits in your driveway by just test driving around the block. I mean, you can kind of, but like, the more nuances around how you use that car on a daily basis is harder to ascertain from just a test drive around, a 10-minute test drive around the dealership parking lot.
no, I think that makes total sense. And then let me ask the final question, which is, and especially in your case, like having gone through, the roller coaster that you went through, like what's your number one learning or like number one piece of advice for early stage founders?
I mean, I think just speed of iteration is this thing that's just been reinforced. When you're burning money as an early stage startup, you've raised a bunch of venture and like every month is cash flow negative. You don't have time. Time is like your worst enemy, and the pressure of time is heavy and intense. And so the faster you can get to the right answer, the better off you are. And a lot of people spend too much time, I think this is important in consumer business, but also in B2B. They spend so much time overanalyzing, scenario modeling, product testing, and not putting it in the hands of users. And if you don't put it in the hands of users, you have no idea how they're going to react. And we just kind of going back to this test drive thing, we just one day woke up and we're like, we have to turn it off. Like we just turned off test drives. Like we didn't test it. We just turned it off. And then what that does,
you replace it with this, or you just had no alternative? It was
we had this. We did the money back guarantee, right?
Okay.
That was the peace of mind that consumers would get. Like until you turn it off and see how customers react to that, and have the conversation to do objective and train your sales teams and folks that are on the phones to do objection handling. And there's no way to know, right? There's really no way to know until you put it in the market. And so we could have spent so much time focus grouping people. And you know what every single focus group would have told you? No, I would not buy a car without a test drive, for the most part, right? And so I think that's like the piece that I think a lot of folks spend too much time on, is like, oh, it needs to be, I think like a lot of us are just perfectionists by nature, particularly if you're like, type A, and you want like the perfect thing to be in the hands of consumers. You know what? If you mess it up, you just change it, iterate on it. You could, if that day, we're like, oh my God, like, after a month, we couldn't sell a single car without a test drive. Well, we got to put test drives back and then go back to the drawing board and figure that out again. Right. And I think that's where people lose too much time. And I think, not being able to iterate quickly can be the death of a lot of startups.
No, I love it. I mean, it's a classic, like Bezos, one-way door, two-way doors as well, right? Like if you know you can take it back, just try it out Cool. Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun.
You remember like the first person who told you about Bitcoin, the first person who told you about Uber? You want to be that person because being first is cool. So be a cool person and tell your founder friends. Send it to them on WhatsApp, put it in a WhatsApp group, put it on a Slack channel. Let people know about the show. Let people know about this episode. Don't let somebody else beat you to the punch and share it with your founder friends first. Remember what Ricky Bobby said. If you ain't first, you're last.